I'm Greg Lammers, organizer for Columbia Atheists. The University of Missouri Skeptics, Atheists, Secular Humanists, and Agnostics, SASHA, did I get that name right, Tony? Thank you. And Columbia Atheists are glad you could join us for what promises to be a fun and thought-provoking evening. Real quick, Carla, did we bring a box for donations?
I can make something work.
Okay. Real quick, we do not yet have a box for donations in the back of the room, which will help defray costs for this event and help fund others like it in the future. But if you're inclined to leave a couple of bucks with us or a blank check, please feel free to do that, but not obligated. Also, we're planning to descend upon the Broadway Brewery afterwards for more conversation and some good local brew if you care to join us. Your speaker has done many varied and creative things. He is co-founder of Skepticon, a yearly free thought conference held in Springfield, Missouri. Skepticon started with a couple of speakers and a few dozen people. The fifth Skepticon was held just this past weekend with 3 days of speakers and workshops and well over 1,000 attendees. Just as important, Skepticon has become a model for established national organizations conferences. The latest Skepticon also features a marriage proposal by your speaker to his lady, Michael Lynn, herself a free thought organizer. She said yes, right?
Yes, in a momentary lapse of judgment, she said yes.
She was high school organizer for the Secular Student Alliance, assisting secular high schoolers to form and maintain groups in the face of often hostile, sometimes illegal opposition from administrations. One of the cases he assisted with was that of Jessica Alquist, a brave young Rhode Islander who sued her school to remove a Christian prayer from the gym wall. Jessica won her case after being viciously maligned by fellow students, community members, and even an elected official. He runs a popular blog, What Would JT Do?, which is now a part of the Patheos network of blogs focusing on religion-related issues, and he is currently writing a book on counter-apologetics. Everyone, with Why the Arguments for God Fail, JT Eberhard.
Yeah, JT's writing a book, just like 90% of the rest of America. Hi, I'm JT Eberhard. This is my blog and all the places you can send me links for free Viagra or computer viruses since I don't have a Mac. I'm going to spend the next hour talking about why the arguments for God suck. But first I want to talk about why I think it's important, why I think reason is a moral obligation. This is the depressing part of the talk. All right, here we have Madeline Newman, 11 years old. At one point, she gets incredibly sick, shallow breathing, skin turning pale, tremendous amounts of pain, curled up in a ball on the floor of her house, and this goes on for 2 weeks. And at no time during those 2 weeks does her parents pick up the phone and summon an ambulance. Why not? Even if there are any believers in this room, they know why. Because her parents thought that anything other than prayer would be testing God's beneficence, and they prayed and prayed and prayed for 2 weeks until finally their daughter died of a completely preventable illness. It was diabetes 1. Could have been treated. Now, if the word bad is to have any meaningful definition, parents who watch while their child dies are bad. And when I read this story, I thought, geez, these people are fucking monsters. But what stuck out to me was how similar they were to me, because these parents wanted their child to live. They wanted their child to get well, just as much as me or any of you out there would want your child to get well. They wanted her to live as much as we would want our child to live. And the problem wasn't, as Christianity would have us believe, that there's something maliciously, inherently wrong with humanity. The problem was just that they had a bad idea about how the universe worked. And because of that, not even their good intentions could save them from it. So what does that say to people like us? Whether you're an atheist, whether you're a Christian, whether you're a Muslim, if you have good intentions, if you want people to be happy and you want them to avoid suffering as a general rule, you have a moral obligation, not only to yourself, but to every other single person you share this planet with, to try to the best of your ability to be reasonable. Otherwise, you run the risk of having your good intentions corrupted by bad ideas about the universe. So if you can accept that being reasonable is a good thing, and not only a good thing, but something you're morally obligated to do, the rest of this talk should address all of the reasons I'm consistently given for why people should believe in God. First off, I want to talk to the atheists. You guys piss me off. Frequently. The next time I hear an atheist say, why do we even bother talking to religious people? It never changes anyone's mind. I swear to God, I'm going to punch you. Not joking. And here's why. How many atheists we got in the room? Raise your hand. Okay, leave your hands up, leave your hands up, leave your hands up. Leave your hand up if you were once religious. Wait, I saw like one hand go up and then down. Now leave your hands in the air if you were once religious. And leave your hand in the air if an argument from someone, whether it's Richard Dawkins in The God Delusion, or a Sam Harris article, or just a friend of yours, helped you leave religion. Why, son of a bitch, that's most people. Imagine that. And that's just the point. We've all heard Christians say, you need to choose to believe in Jesus. I'm here to tell you right now that's not possible. It's just not. We don't choose our beliefs. Our beliefs are the product of whatever thoughts or whatever facts are rattling around our skulls, and we're powerless to do anything else. And if you doubt this, try walking up to the edge of a building and convincing yourself by force of will that gravity doesn't work. I mean, there's no one in this room that can do that. There's no one on this planet that can do that, because your mind is made up for you. Even if you wanted to believe that gravity doesn't work, you couldn't do it. So when atheists say, why argue with religious people? We'll never change their minds. Well, yes, you can. Yes, you can. And what kills me about that phrase is it puts all the culpability on the religious person, because they're so closed-minded. It wasn't me, I made the perfect presentation. They're just so closed-minded it didn't work. Well, bullshit. We can all get better about talking about religion, all right? And if you want to make a better world, if you want to force people to think, if you want to bring the burden of societal pressure to religious people to try and be reasonable, like their moral obligation is, then you need to get better. And that's why I'm giving this talk. You know, why else would you give a talk to a bunch of atheists about why the arguments for God suck? You guys already know. All right, so what are the tricks they'll use? One of the first tricks they'll use is, you need to respect my beliefs. How many of us have heard that? Right, exactly. Here's the deal. No, I think it's good to respect people, but I don't think respecting people means treating them like they don't have the fortitude to withstand some mild criticism. I don't think respecting people is treating them like if they were wrong, they wouldn't want to know. To me, that's condescension. That's placating someone. So when people say, you need to respect my beliefs, well, I think they have a very wonky definition of respect if they mean don't criticize me or don't disagree. And if they do mean don't criticize or don't disagree, or you can't criticize or you can't disagree, well, go apeshit then. All right, what arguments are we likely to hear? There are a bunch of red herrings they'll use. First is, atheists are mean, atheists are cruel. Well, the fact of the matter is, atheists could be fucking murderers and it would not make us wrong. So if they're saying that atheists are mean or somehow terrible, what does it matter? Now, can you get to the reasons why you think God exists? Another thing they'll say is science can't explain what the hell ever. And a lot of atheists will continue in the argument as though nothing wrong ever got said here, instead of pointing out, well, this word here is problematic. Science can't explain what the hell ever. What about science? Hasn't explained what the hell ever. You'll find if you call them on this bullshit early in the argument, this will change the whole context of the argument moving forward. There is a proper way to handle things we don't know, or things science hasn't explained. And that is to say, I don't know. If for everything we don't know, you insert God into that point, you're equating God with our ignorance, which means you're doing one of two things. You're either creating a situation where you're worshiping what we don't know, you're worshiping human ignorance, which is not doing you any favors, or you're equating God to this quality that with every fiber of our being, we're trying to purge from society. I mean, humanity flourishes because we've tried to get rid of ignorance at every opportunity. It's the reason we have cell phones, clean water, plentiful food, pornography you can download. It's the reason we have all of these things. If you equate God to something we're trying to get rid of, then you're not doing God any favors. There's really no way to win by equating God to the things we don't know. How many of you have heard this one? You can't prove God doesn't exist. Now, a simple way to rebut this might be to say, well, you can't prove Smurfs don't exist, but you don't believe in them, which is a perfectly fair thing to do. You don't automatically believe in everything you can't prove. You can't prove there's no hamsters living in the middle of the sun, but nobody believes in those things. But I find when I talk to religious people that because they hear this so often, they start to think that, well, maybe this is a good response. So when people say to me, you can't prove God doesn't exist, the way I try to get them to play by conventional logic, whenever they say you can't prove God doesn't exist, the next words out of my mouth are, "You're a thief," which always takes them back a little bit. It's like, what? You're a thief. You steal shit from people. Stop doing it. I say, well, I'm not a thief, so prove you're not a thief. And the next words out of their mouth are invariably, well, there's no evidence to prove that I'm a... Oh. But it takes them off their script. It takes them off the apologetic script they get taught in church, and it forces them to actually think. Anything you can do like that, that's creative, that makes them think, that just makes them go, wait, what? Anytime you do that, you're winning. Other things we'll hear. Read the Bible. All the answers are right there in the Bible. And it's always interesting. They say read the Bible. I wonder how many religious people have read it. In September 2010, the Pew Forum on Religion and Public Life released a study that confirmed that atheists on the whole knew more about the various religions than the followers of those religions. So how much good does it do for a Christian to tell me to read the Bible? And I've read it 3 times. Some of the things that study found. 45% of Roman Catholics didn't know that the Eucharist, the cracker and the wine, didn't literally become the blood of Christ like the church says it does. More than half of Protestants couldn't identify Martin Luther as the guy who kicked off the Protestant Reformation. This would be understandable. But even Christian groups have done polling on this. Bill Keller Ministries released a poll several years ago that confirmed that roughly 10% of practicing Christians had read the Bible in full. Shortly after that study, Knowledge Networks, at the behest of Christianity Today, released another study confirming that 74% of professing Christians believe the Bible is the authoritative guide to faith. If only there was some commandment in it prohibiting professions of belief in things you didn't know. I mean, not that most Christians would have read it. But how can they then tell me or you or anyone else, read the Bible, that's what's going to get you to God, when it clearly didn't get them to God? And maybe this ignorance of the Bible is completely understandable. I mean, the Bible is a hulking read. It's over 1,000 pages. But how many Christians have read 2 Harry Potter books? Or 2 Twilight books, heaven forbid. The next thing you're going to hear is, oh, the Bible is compatible with science. And it has to be. I mean, we live in a world transformed by science. That clean water I talked about earlier, the plentiful food. I mean, we live in a society where you no longer have to work on the hunt all day just for the privilege of eating that night. We live in a world where you can drink water without worrying about catching every disease on the fucking planet. You know why? Science. If religion's to live in the minds of most people, it has to be compatible with science. I mean, this is Ray Comfort's whole spiel. This is from Skepticon this year. We had some protesters outside spreading Ray Comfort's idea that science and the Bible are totally compatible. To which I have the following questions. Do you think that biologists have nothing to say about the idea of someone rising from the dead? Do you think that physicists won't shit a brick at the idea of someone walking on water? Do you think that people being converted into pillars of salt is not under the purview of chemists? Do you think the idea of a global flood that somehow left no evidence is not under the jurisdiction of geologists? And even if you don't think geologists would have a problem with something like that, the historians, the PhD historians, do have a problem with that because lots of civilizations, like Egypt's 6th dynasty, who were around when the flood was supposed to have transpired, made copious records of their civilizations and somehow missed being exterminated by a global flood. Maybe they're just very resilient people, those Egyptians. But if you're going to tell me that the Bible is compatible with science, you need to be able to answer these questions. And the answer is completely obvious. Religious people do have answers to scientific questions. Those answers are just wrong. The response will be, but there are religious scientists, and they'll point to groups like the Discovery Institute, which is a totally secular organization. And they have PhD scientists who are saying all kinds of things, evolution is false, and geological flood could have really happened. But who are they telling? Are they telling the other PhDs in the field who could make sure that their ideas get into textbooks and become part of scientific canon? Or are they telling music majors like me, or plumbers and waitresses? Not that those people aren't smart, but they're not experts in the field. If science is determined by the consensus of the experts, why are they telling you? Of all the people in the world, why are they telling you? I mean, this should tell you who their target audience is. It should also tell you who they are and how they operate. But then they'll hit you with questions, if you're so smart, atheist, how did life begin? If not God, how did life begin? And the answer is, even if I had no fucking clue, even if scientists had no fucking clue, why does that mean that you do? And my ignorance does not amount to your knowledge. Usually the answer looks something like this. Simple. Now, it's entirely possible that this reads as little more than word soup to you. There was a time in my life when it read as little more than word soup to me. To rectify that, I made an appointment with the biology teachers at my university, who then sent me to a chemist, because it turns out this is more chemistry than anything, and they explained it to me. What I didn't do is just walk up to any asshole on the street and be like, hey, you, can you explain this to me? That Christians do that, and do it a lot, suggests that they're looking for an argument from ignorance, not that they actually have an interest in knowing the answer to this question. Now, they might say, like, well, isn't it an appeal to authority, saying you need to listen to what scientists say? Well, no, that's only when you're appealing to an individual authority. We all appeal to authorities. Every time we bite into a cheeseburger, we're deferring to the knowledge of the experts in terms of bacteria. Every time we fly on an airplane, which for me is a lot, I'm deferring to the knowledge of physicists. It doesn't matter that I understand the physics behind it, it only matters that the consensus of the experts do. And every single human being does this every time they use their computer, fly on an airplane and whatnot. Up until it gets to the origin of life and evolution and things that conflict with their religion, then all of a sudden, somehow there's a conspiracy. Like, that really has to be the answer. I mean, do you think that science is the greatest coup in all of history? That they've just laid low for thousands of years, improving the quality of our lives and answering the unanswered questions of the universe, only so that just now they can deceive us on evolution and the origin of life? Of course not. Science is the greatest tool we've ever uncovered for unmasking the mysteries of the universe. And the methods we've used to establish that evolution is a fact about the universe are the exact same methods they've used to make sure your cell phone works. You think your cell phone works, you can't really deny evolution. So then they'll say, well, doesn't the world look designed? Isn't it all orderly? And look at a tree, how could that have come to be? Well, no, the universe doesn't look designed. The universe doesn't look designed because there are tons of mechanisms in place that create order all by themselves. The example I always use are snowflakes. They're unique, highly complex, far more complex with liquid water, than liquid water, but nobody for a minute feels the need to invoke a snowflake-making god. Because we know the natural processes that create snowflakes and ice crystals all by themselves. In fact, in order to maintain a higher state of disorder, which is liquid water, you have to keep putting energy into the system. If you take all the energy out of the system and just let nature run its course, you create order all by yourself. The same is true of stars. If you get a big enough cloud of hydrogen, big enough that it'll create enough gravity to pull itself together, it'll spike the temperature in the middle through pressure, and you'll get a far more complex, highly more complex star with no appeal to God being necessary. It's called the gene's instability. And for literally everything we've explained, it works this way. I mean, there was literally a time when nothing was explained. And ever since that time, quite literally, everything we have explained has been found to be the product of mindless forces acting upon inanimate objects. Literally every single one. Now, we have to guess at all the things we haven't explained. How do you guess? I mean, if you have two boxers who have fought 1,000,000 fights, and one boxer has won every single fight, and they're about to fight again, who do you bet your life savings on? And you bet on the one that has been found to be the case every single time. And in fact, there have been religious explanations throughout history. Every single one of us can think of a situation where a religious explanation has been replaced by a scientific explanation. Look no further than lightning and earthquakes. Can anyone in this room think of a scientific explanation that's been replaced by a religious one? And you can't, because there are none. And that is the way it has been every single time we've explained something. Every single piece of new knowledge has been an erosion of religion. And it's been that way since we crawled out of the ooze. And they'll say, well, isn't science your religion? Isn't science just a matter of faith? Don't you just believe in science? Well, no. Science makes one assumption, and that assumption is the universe operates under a set of rules. It's called inductive reasoning. And even religious people act this way. Even the most die-hard religious person, if they put their hand on a stove and burn the shit out of their hand one week, they're not going to walk by the stove the next week and put their hand on the stove again, because they expect the universe to be consistent. And that is the only assumption science makes. And if it's true, we should be able to test it, and we do. Every time we drop a stone and measure its rate of descent, every time we throw a satellite out and hit something the size of a pinhead on the far edge of our solar system, we test that assumption, and it works. It works so well that, once again, we've managed to transform our world on account of it. It's also why if you saw an animal speak, it would probably strike you as weird, because it's not consistent. And it's also why, after you heard like 20 animals speak, you'd probably get used to it after a while. The next one is like, how is reason even possible without God? If your brain is just made of matter, how does reason even possible without a soul or without God giving you the ability to think? Well, you act like matter can't perform logic or make choices just on its own. I mean, sure, in the right configuration it can. Here are some computer parts that can't perform logic at all. But arrange them in the right way, all of a sudden matter can think and make choices and assess things. Now, what you're going to hear from religious people then is, aha! You have to build computers. So even if matter can reason on its own, doesn't it need a designer? Well, turns out no. Computers aren't made out of molecules that self-replicate. I mean, this is the reason paintings don't paint themselves and buildings don't build themselves. They're not made out of molecules that self-replicate. Human beings, on the other hand, are. We're made out of DNA, which makes us subject to 3 different forces. And if you have these 3 forces at play, you'll always have improved functionality over time. These forces are reproduction, mutation, and selection. If you have these 3 forces with self-replicating molecules, you'll have improved functionality over time. You'll build things like eyes and brains, and the study of biology is a study of how this could have happened. It's replete with evidence for how these forces have, I won't say directed because that would make it sound intentional, but have affected and driven our development up to this point. The ultimate example of the fine-tuning argument there is Paley's Watchmaker. Have we all heard this one? If an uneducated man is walking along on the beach and finds a watch in the sand, he picks it up and he sees the gears and everything inside, and he confirms that it's so complex there has to be a watchmaker somewhere out there. But consider the context. I mean, you're saying God made everything. God made the sand, God made the ocean, the grass, everything that is a basis of comparison for you to find this watch and think that it's designed. I mean, you're literally picking up a watch on a beach of watches, in an ocean of watches, in an atmosphere of watches, and saying, this one is the one that's designed. It's kind of ridiculous when you think about it. They'll say, but if reason is only the product of unthinking matter, how do we know we can trust it? Well, what other option do you have? I mean, if you didn't get to your beliefs about God and everything else by reason, I mean, how did you get there? You might say, well, reason isn't completely reliable. Reason isn't the only way to know things. You say, well, how do you know? And if they say because, you've just won the argument. Reason is how we get to all reliable conclusions about the universe. And if you didn't get there, if you didn't get to God by that way, why should we even listen to what you have to say? Prophecy. But there are prophecies in the Bible, and that confirms God existed, because these prophecies couldn't have happened if there was no God. This is normally a 7-part talk, but I've kind of condensed 3 of the parts here to get into this talk. Let's look at the type of prophecies we see in the Bible. First, the vague prophecies. This is Luke 7:27. This is one you're going to hear a lot. This is the one about whom it is written, I will send my messenger ahead of you, and will prepare the way before you. And Jesus says this prophecy was fulfilled by John. How many different ways could that be fulfilled? I mean, compare this to something like my horoscope. Or here's a prophecy I made up before I came in here. There will come a time when 3 evil men will rise to power, and a woman will oppose them, leading the people against them. I would bet a tremendous sum of money that this prophecy would be fulfilled in about 20 years. Or compare it to my horoscope for today. You experience a burst of great energy that should help you achieve almost anything close to your heart. A new love, a big win in business, or even a quiet reconciliation are all possible. By Jove, it's a miracle. Now, if God exists, and He's all-wise, and He knows the past and future, couldn't He do better than this? I mean, imagine if any of you got sent back in time, not even with Google, just with what you know, what kind of prophecies could you make? And shouldn't God be able to do better than us? Compare this to, this is the one I wrote right in here. In the 2nd century of Rome, there shall be 5 emperors. They'll be named Nerva, Trajan, Hadrian, Antonius Pius, and Marcus Aurelius. Now that's a fucking prophecy. Imagine what you could do with Google. God should be expected to do better. Trivial prophecies. How impressed would you be with something like this? Tomorrow the sun will rise. The Bible is full of prophecies of about this stature. And which is more likely? That a God who wanted to convey his existence by prophecy handed it to a bunch of people in an age where China had invented the printing press, but handed it to completely other people and said, people aren't going to, I'm not going to give this to everyone, but I'm going to give it to you, and you go tell people they need to listen to you. And this is the best he could do. Or that those people just made stuff up. One of those is far more likely than the other. Cheating prophecies. This is my favorite section, so I was sure to include it. If Jesus existed, he was a rabbi. He would have known what the Old Testament says. So when you see stuff in the Old Testament here, like Zechariah 9:9, rejoice greatly, O daughter of Zion. Shout, daughter of Jerusalem. See, your king comes to you righteous and having salvation, gentle and riding on a donkey, on a colt, the foal of a donkey. He would have known this. And if you think that's just speculation, skip ahead to Matthew 21. Where Jesus says, go to the village ahead of you, and at once you will find a donkey tied there with her colt by her. Untie them and bring them to me. If anyone says anything to you, tell him that the Lord needs them, and he will send them right away. This took place to fulfill what was spoken through the prophet. How hard is it to fulfill a prophecy you already knew about beforehand? Hint, not. So, even if there were a prophecy in the Bible that looked like an actual prophecy, if God existed, why would he nestle it in amongst all kinds of stuff like this? I mean, what is more likely, that God gave them an actual prophecy to convey his existence, or they just made enough guesses that finally they were blindfolded and hit the bullseye once? Moving the goalposts. This will happen. So if we're having a hypothetical conversation with a Christian, they've given us all these arguments, and they do. They'll give one argument, you'll beat it down, they'll move right on to another as if nothing had ever happened. And then when they get pressed again on God's existence, boy, they'll break out that argument that you rebutted in 2 seconds. They will move the goalposts. They'll keep throwing arguments out until hopefully one of them sticks. Don't let them do that. Hold them to one. If they're going with the design argument, hold them to that. If they try to go somewhere else, like, no, we're still talking about design, and get them to either admit that they're wrong on that or give you something you can't rebut. But don't let them get away. Otherwise, they'll just sit there and run you in circles all day. They'll do it. Cosmological argument. Any of you people who watch William Lane Craig on YouTube, you've heard this one. Essentially, the conclusion is everything that comes into being has a creator. And the universe came into being, therefore it has a creator. Craig and Frank Turek both conclude that God must be something that exists outside of space and time because those things came into being at the Big Bang. Well, the deal is, you're making a huge jump of logic to say it must have been God. You can say, even if I grant the premises of that argument, which I don't, but even if I did, all you can really say is that whatever catalyzed the Big Bang existed outside of space and time. You can't say it was a God. And consider all the times we've inserted God into ignorance before. How would William Lane Craig have done at a time when we didn't understand earthquakes? He would say something to the tune of, what could move the earth but God? Matter can't move itself, so there must be something unbound by the laws of science that moves the earth when earthquakes transpire. But we found out later that plate tectonics, the earth can't actually move itself. So what are the odds when we figure out what came before the Big Bang? Because the truth is, we don't know. Cosmologists don't know. And if cosmologists don't know, William Lane Craig sure as fuck doesn't know. Right? Whatever catalyzed the Big Bang, even if I grant the premises of your argument, must exist outside of space and time, why not matter in the laws of physics? I mean, you already believe that something can either exist forever, God, or can just pop out of nothing into existence, God. If you already believe those things can happen, why not matter in the laws of physics? These things we know we already have. These things we know create order all by themselves and could create a universe all by themselves. Why do we need a God in that situation? Another thing they'll try to say is, well, if existence is infinite, how could we ever get here? Because if there's an infinite number of days between now and when things started, we could never get here. There's an infinite number of days in between. Now, how mathematicians understand infinity in this context is called Cantorian set theorem. I'm not a mathematician. I'm a music major. I was an opera singer for a living. But to break it down simply, there are multiple types of infinities. Infinities can be part of a set. If you take the sum of real numbers and take all the numbers between 1 and 2, how many are there? Well, there's infinite, because you can keep moving the decimal place out. But it's still part of a bigger chain. Another way to distill it would be, was this 20 feet between me and the projector there? Well, in order to go the 20 feet, I have to first go 10 feet. I have to go halfway. In order to go 10 feet, I have to go 5 feet. And before I go 5 feet, I have to go 2.5 feet. And you can keep breaking this down until you realize I have to go an infinite number of distances before I get there. So I could never get there by William Lane Craig's logic. Yet, lo and behold, I am God. Then they'll say, but history, the Bible is completely historically accurate. Say for a moment it's not. But even if it was, so what? I mean, remember, historians have something to say about it, not that the Bible's historically accurate, but even if it was historically accurate, so what? If I took a history book, completely compliant with everything we know about history, and on the very last page wrote, and Elvis rose from the dead, what would that mean? Just because it's historically accurate doesn't mean its claims about people rising from the dead and walking on water are accurate. I mean, right now, there are religions being conceived, right now, all over the world, that Christians don't believe in, that are building their holy books that would be historically accurate. Not because their religions are true, but because they were written during a point in history. So it doesn't matter if the book is historically accurate. It just means they were written by people who could look at historical events. It says nothing about people rising from the dead or walking on water, or the existence of hell, or talking donkeys, or talking snakes, or what have you. What's next? What's next? What's next? Oh, how many of you have heard this one? But I feel God, right? You go to church, this is what everyone who feels God, stand up and sing. Well, I actually believe that religious people are sincere when they say this. I think they really think they feel God. I think they have some feelings. I don't think they feel God. Because I don't think our senses always give us the proper input information. For instance, you guys see this? Yeah. There's an A here and a B here. And believe it or not, square A and square B are the exact same color. Watch. Now, I've done this before, and everyone say, well, the square changed as it went down. Try it this way. They're the same color. And even when I make them go away, they'll still strike you as different colors. Because your brain has a flaw that makes these seem different. And it's the whole way that optical illusions can exist. This is how magicians make their living. On the fact that your sensory inputs don't always give you the right information. So I believe that religious people feel something fuzzy, something good, something euphoric when they pray. I really do. But what are the odds that this is the way that God, who wants a relationship with them, has chosen to communicate with them? Not by showing up at their front door and saying, hi, I'm God, I know you have questions, but by giving them fuzzy feelings when they pray that allows Muslims to believe that they're right, or Hindus to believe that they're right. Now, even religious people realize that all these other people who pray and think they feel God when it's not their God are completely wrong. So clearly there's some kind of flaw in psychology that can allow sincere people to believe that they're wrong when they pray and they feel God. Why not everyone? If most people are wrong when they feel that way, why not religious people? Or why not Christians? Moral arguments. At its simplest, it's you can't ever be moral without God. Which is pretty much what it always is. More complex, it's you can't have a moral system that makes sense without God. So let's talk about that. Any question about what we ought to do is a question that deals with our desires. For instance, if we want our car to run well, we ought to change the oil. And the objection you always get is, well, you can't get an ought from an is. Well, you can. You do it every single day, and I'll prove it to you. If you want to smell good, you ought to take a shower. I mean, a couple things have to be true here. You must want to be clean, and the shower must not melt off your skin or have some other deleterious effect that you don't want. But as long as taking a shower would get you what you want, then you ought to take a shower. Ditto with the car and the engine example. If you want your car to run, you ought to change the oil. So morally, to determine what we ought to do, we need to figure out what we want. And there's a simple answer to it. We all want to be happy. I mean, right? I mean, this is why we have jobs that we hate, because we'd rather have a roof over our heads and food in our stomach and work a job we hate than be homeless. So what makes us happy? Well, even religious people think this way. And this is why they create a heaven they think everyone wants to go to and a hell they think no one wants to go to. Because you have to want to follow God. If they say, you need to follow God's will because then you go to heaven, we say, well, what if I want to go to hell? What ought I to do then? How can they appeal to you at that point? They've really got no way to make you want to do what God wants. And you can even test Christians on this. You can say, if you found out today that following the 10 Commandments is what landed you in hell, and disobeying is what landed you in heaven, how would your behavior change? And I've done this to countless religious people, and the answer is always the same. I would do what would get me into heaven, even if it meant disobeying God's will. The response then is, what about psychos? Aren't they just doing what they think will get them what they want? Well, yes. What else could they do? I mean, anytime you make a choice, you're doing what you think will get you what you want the most. I mean, you might be wrong, but that's what it means to make a choice. And if that is the desire that psychos have, what else can they do? But then again, if that's true, what's best for us, in the interest of happiness for most of the population, is to kick psychos out of the population, to lock them up, to keep them away from us, which is exactly what we do. But then the objection is, but doesn't that mean might makes right? Well, yes and no. Might is not an individual property. I mean, it's not just who's the biggest and the strongest, because if you have a colony of 100 people, and the biggest and the strongest guy starts trying to throw his weight around, the other 99 are going to get together and kick the shit out of that person. Working together, cooperating, having empathy and compassion for one another, that's how societies achieve strength. And we even see this in other species. Lions, bloodthirsty on the hunt, don't eat each other. Piranhas go crazy, working as a team, don't eat each other. We've done experiments with bonobos where we'll put them, rhesus monkeys, where we'll put them in a cage where in order to get fed they have to pull a lever that will shock one of their cage mates. And even rhesus monkeys will starve themselves for 12 and 14 days at a time rather than shock their cage mates. Now these animals don't believe in God, so there must be something that's driving them to be compassionate towards one another. And it's not that hard to imagine that compassion was selected for in terms of evolution. It's what makes societies powerful. It's what keeps them alive. We're subject to the same DNA. So it's not hard to imagine that human beings have compassion and empathy. I mean, we don't need God to tell us what will make a better society. We only need to realize that making a habit of killing our neighbors and raping their pets and stealing their pornography as a matter of habit is not going to lead to a better society for everybody. So we may not ever know with perfect certainty what makes people the most happy, but we can still make certain claims about what makes people happy that are true. Love is better than hate. Genocide is less good for us than being good to one another. If we acknowledge that the world would suck without moral rules, that's all the impetus we really need to make them up. Now, it won't make a perfect world, but we can always make a better world, even if we can't make a utopian one. Every individual can even see how certain behaviors won't get them what they want in life. If I'm a dick to people, I'm going to have fewer friends. I'm going to be welcome in fewer places. I'll have to remember what lies I've told. I'll have more enemies. I'll have more troubles. I'll become the type of person I hate. For me, I don't know about you guys, but I've had stuff stolen from me. You guys had stuff stolen from you? I don't know about you, but I remember hating the person who stole my things. What if I were to steal? I would necessarily become the type of person I'd hate, and I'd hate myself. Anybody who thinks they can go through life being the type of person they'd hate and be happy hasn't tried living the alternative, and hasn't read the plethora of scientific studies that have confirmed that if you generally engage in behavior that's malicious towards other people, you'll be a less happy person. Yeah, essentially life sucks if you're an asshole. And that's all you need to make up moral rules. If you listen to people like William Lane Craig, they'll tell you without God that the Holocaust is bad as a mere matter of opinion. No. The Holocaust created a tremendous amount of suffering in the world and threw the world into turmoil. Everybody was unhappy. People died in war. If we want to be happy, we shouldn't genocide other species. It's crazy, I know. And even if we needed a God to be moral, your argument can't be that human beings are so loose-weaved morally that we need a God to look up to who ordered one of his followers to kill his kid. I mean, this is the story that is presented in every single Sunday school, with Abraham being the hero. God told Abraham to kill his son, and Abraham said he would do it. And according to Christian Sunday school lessons, Abraham passed the test. Now, according to any sane standard of morality, Abraham failed the test. God said, kill your kid. What is it Hitchens said? If I was ever asked to admire the man who said I'd gut my kid to show my faith, I'd say, no, fuck you. If God came down and told me to kill my son, that I've not had yet, to my knowledge, even though I would know God existed, I would know he was the ultimate power in the universe, my words to him would be, go to hell. I'd rather die than kill my own son. Abraham failed the moral test. Your argument can be that human beings can't grasp morality so much that they need Old Testament barbarity. Exodus 35:2, kill anybody who worked on Saturday. Now the response from Christians will be, but Jesus came and undid all the Old Testament morals. And I just wonder, do they realize what is implied by that? By using that excuse, you're saying, yes, at one point it was totally moral to kill people for working on Saturday. There was never a time when that was a good moral idea. There was never a time when that augmented human happiness. We don't need to admire that God in order to have morality. Or even the idea that belief can supersede compassion. In most Christian faiths, someone like Osama bin Laden, who killed thousands of people, 5 minutes before his death could decide that someone rose from the dead 2,000 years ago and wind up in heaven. Whereas someone like me, who has never killed anyone, to my knowledge, who tries to be a charitable and good person, can merit eternal torture just because I couldn't bring myself to believe someone rose from the dead 2,000 years ago. Yeah, if you believe that scenario is plausible, you don't have any concept of morality, and you've just lost any right you have to lecture me about it. Or even the concept of hell, the idea that you could be punished eternally for your honest opinion. Any parent, if they could correct the poor behaviors of their children without using punishment, would do it. We use punishment to correct action, not to destroy. That God uses it the other way should tell you all you need to know about not only that God, but the people who follow him and worship him and think that's a good idea. You'll hear that belief in God makes people better. Well, it really doesn't. If you look at the Prison Bureau statistics, there are Christians all over our prison system. What's more, it's like I said before, you don't choose your beliefs. Just like I can't make myself believe that gravity doesn't work, no matter how much I want to. No matter how much I want to, I can't believe a Canaanite Jew rose from the dead. I can't do it. My mind is made up for me. For God to have made me with that mind and then say, this is how you get into heaven, I mean, that's setting me up to fail. This is a God who wants to open up doors into hell, not close them. Or even the Christians will say, if you don't have God, you can't have absolute morality. Well, we don't have absolute morality. And morality is situational. The Bible says, thou shalt not bear false witness. Well, if the Gestapo's knocking on your door in Nazi Germany asking if you're harboring Jews, the moral thing to do is to lie your ass off. If stealing would prevent someone from dying, you steal. All morality is situational, and it's based on how much happiness will be produced versus how much suffering will be averted, not by just standard rules that apply to every situation. The problem of evil is another one that stumps Christians, for a very good reason. Christians will tell you that existence is proof of God's perfection. Look around you, it's ordered, it's perfect. but it's not. It's just not. And this kid here is starving. God doesn't see fit to feed him. If you're like me, you see this kid, your heart sinks. And if you're a Christian and you would feed this child if you could, then you admit that this world is not perfect. You admit that you would do it differently than God. We do so many things that spit in the face of God's design. God sends hurricanes that destroy Christians and atheists alike, that don't announce their paths. And we subvert God's will by making satellite weather that tells us when hurricanes are coming. Now, the Christian might say, well, God gave us the means to do that. Well, then why fucking make hurricanes in the first place? I mean, the answer to suffering that you'll get from all the big-name apologists is that God abhors suffering, but he also wants us to have free will. And sometimes we use our free will to visit suffering upon other people. And the popular response by people like Sam Harris is that, well, there are some things that create suffering that aren't dependent on how we treat each other. Hurricanes are just such an example. You know, it doesn't matter how nice I am to someone else, hurricanes are going to kill people. So that excuse doesn't fly. But whenever I hear the free will argument used, I think, do we need malicious options in order to have free will? Here's what I mean. This building we're in right here, there's lots of things we can do with this building. We could kick the building. We could paint the building. We could pee on the building. At which point your school would use their free will to give you a citation. You can't leap over the building. You can't do it. You couldn't convert the building into a unicorn with the power of your mind. These are just abilities you don't have. But not having these abilities doesn't infringe on your free will. All you need are choices. You don't need all the choices, you just need some choices, right? Well, how does that apply to other things? In life, we have particular options. We can pet puppies, we can pray, we can pee on buildings, we can snowboard, and we can have gay sex. Now, gay sex in and of itself is not bad. It's not like God is just stumbling across the cosmos and bumps into this rule he didn't make. Well, no, God makes the more rules. So for someday, for whatever reason, Lord knows what, God decides if you have gay sex, you're burning for eternity. Right? For whatever reason, but he makes that call. But then he leaves it there. Why? We don't need it there to have free will. We have all of these other choices, right? We don't need all the choices in order to have free will. Non-belief is another one. Why is that option present? And the answer here is that God wants you to have the choice to reject him. But that's not the choice we have. God could make belief in him as inherent to us as hunger or fight or flight response. And at that point, at least we'd have the option to choose whether or not to obey God. And I'm here to tell you right now, I would choose to disobey God in a second. Kill your son, fuck off, not doing it. But Christians will make it say, like, you know, God wants you to have the choice to reject him, and they'll conflate it with the choice to believe in him. As if God has given us all the evidence we need, which he clearly hasn't, because such a small percentage of the overall population throughout history is Christian. They're two different things, so I don't buy that argument for a second. And there's always a trump card, though. No matter how much the evidence controverts their position, no matter how vacuous their reasons, they can always say, but I believe through faith. And for people who do that, I have a single question. Can you distinguish faith from gullibility? I mean, if you're gullible, you believe anything, right? Yet, is there a conclusion that is so ludicrous, so flagrantly at odds with reality, that faith cannot be advanced in its defense? And if there's not, what good is faith as a means to acquire knowledge? You can believe in unicorns through faith, Smurfs through faith, God through faith. If faith can be used to defend any belief, what use is it to you? And if God really exists, is this the best he could give you? The same thing that creates error in all those other religions? Consider how that appeals to people who say God speaks to me. Right? Who does God not speak to? Doesn't speak to every Hindu. Every single Hindu, if you're a Christian, has either been lying, deluded, or crazy when they say God has spoken to them or their gods have spoken to them. God has not spoken to every pagan. Likewise, they're either lying, deluded, or crazy. They have to be for Christianity to be right. Ditto for every Muslim. All throughout history, literally almost every believer of every religion throughout all of time, for Christianity to be true, their God is the one true God, they have to be either lying, deluded, or crazy. But these people weren't setting out to be wrong. I mean, they wanted to know God's nature. They wanted to commune with God, and they really thought God was speaking to them. But he wasn't. God also didn't speak to Andrea Yates, the Christian woman who drowned her children because God told her so. He also didn't speak to Daphne Spurlock, the very Christian woman who slit her throat at the behest of God's voice. He didn't speak to Torquemada, or to the Newmans who watched while their daughter died of diabetes. So even Christians who believe God is speaking directly to them and conveying his will can be wrong. I mean, every Christian is going to tell you, these people had something wrong with their faith. Their faith was not my faith. These weren't true Christians. But then how do you know that Abraham was? If Daphne Spurlock wasn't talking to God and Andrea Yates wasn't talking to God, but were both willing to kill their children through faith, how do you know God was speaking to Abraham? How do you know God was speaking to Jephthah? To the unbiased eye, if Daphne Spurlock failed, if Andrea Yates failed, then Abraham failed, and Jephthah failed. It's clear that people can believe God is speaking to them, whether from other religions or whether from Christianity, and be completely wrong. It's clear that most of them are if you're a Christian. Why not everybody? If the starting probability is so high, why not everybody? And what's more, don't give me this, they're not true Christians nonsense. I don't care if their beliefs are different from your beliefs. There are tons of different religious beliefs in the world. What matters to me is whether or not your beliefs are more likely to be true. One irrationality, in terms of our moral obligations to be reasonable, is just as bad as another. And Christians think that by saying, their Christianity is not my Christianity, they've absolved themselves. Well, no. If you're no more likely to be right, then that's a problem. How can you then say that those people have gotten religion wrong when you're using the same machinations of faith that they did? The only way we can really determine a right answer from a wrong answer is to be reasonable, and faith takes that away from us. They'll also say, my beliefs have changed my life. I can't be an atheist because I was hung up on drugs, and now I'm all hung up on the Lord. And Jesus got me through my drug addiction. It got me through this hard time in my life. And they don't realize that beliefs don't need to be true in order to affect someone's life. They just need to be held. I mean, if I believe that the monster under my bed is going to gnaw my legs off at the knee if I don't donate $50 a week to the United Way, I'm going to be charitable. I like my knees where they fucking are, thank you. But it says nothing to the existence of the demon under my bed. So when Christians say this, I believe them. But it doesn't do anything to support their cause. And there's all kinds of ways they'll get out of this. God works in mysterious ways. God's thinking is like so beyond ours, man. And you realize this only comes up when God has done something that by human standards is fucking stupid. God made us with wisdom teeth that do nothing but hurt our jaws. God made us with appendix that in lots of people are just a ticking time bomb and that we don't even need. It can be removed and you'd never even notice. Yeah, it looks stupid, but God's got, surely got some reason that would make it smart. You've just taken away your ability to decide that God was ever dumb. Jews into ovens? Yeah, God's got a plan. There's literally no way you could ever convict God, no matter how egregious his offenses against either humanity or reason at that point. And you can't judge God by human standards as the extension of that. But the fact is that human standards are all we've got. That's what we have to work with. It's human standards that Christians have used to establish God's goodness in the first place. If they're good enough to establish his goodness, they've got to be good enough to establish that maybe he's got some things wrong or maybe he's just ridiculous. Everyone who was at Skepticon last week smiles. To give you some context, after this slide at Skepticon this year, I proposed to my girlfriend, and she cried so much. Oh boy, now I'm all thinking about that. They'll say, you have no evidence for love, but you believe in love, so why not God? You have no evidence for God, and why not believe in God? But they're comparing apples and oranges here. Love is a state of the brain. And the way we determine, our evidence for states of the brain is how people behave. Happiness is a state of the brain. When people are happy, they smile and laugh and are more generous. When people are sad, they cry and they frown and punch people. And when people are in love, they behave a certain way. They propose to girlfriends at the end of their talks. Belief in God is a state of the brain. And we have so much evidence for this in the behavior of other people that nobody in their right mind doubts that people believe in God. And that's exactly what love is. But God is not a state of the brain. God is the same as this table, the same as a tree. He's something outside the brain for which we can have evidence for. So, love? We have tons of evidence. We have plenty of evidence. If love is your standard, we have way more evidence for love than we have for God. Lastly, they'll say, but isn't it possible that one day we'll find evidence for God? They're trying to pin you down on being closed-minded. And yes, it's possible that one day we'll find evidence for God. We don't have any right now. And if we ever find any for God, then we'll change our mind, but not a moment sooner. Because if you're basing your belief in God off evidence we may find one day, you're by definition basing your belief in God off things we don't know. Somehow they think that wins them the argument. I don't see how it's anything but a concession, honestly. So what's the take-home of the story? The moral here is you don't need 5 PhDs in everythingology to assault the reasons you're going to get for believing in God. A lot of atheists believe that the arguments for God's existence are fancy and very intellectual and very difficult to assail, and you need to be a walking encyclopedia to beat them. No. The arguments for God's existence have been the same for hundreds of years. They were conceived by people whose knowledge about science and history and virtually every subject would be dwarfed by a modern-day 5-year-old. And they're the same arguments. Every single person can beat these arguments, and we should. We should, not because we're agents of atheism, but because we're agents of reason. If we have a moral obligation to be reasonable, we not only need to realize that in ourselves, but hold our neighbors' feet to the fire for it. Because beliefs are the gatekeepers of actions, and our actions affect everybody around us. That makes the beliefs of our neighbors our business. It makes it something we should care about. Oh, I forgot what I was going to say next. We don't talk about religion enough because it's such a pain in the ass. But we really can change minds by doing it. And we can create a culture where people worry about telling someone that Jesus rose from the dead for fear that they're going to be beaten down for being unreasonable for the fear that they're going to be humiliated. Yeah, we don't want to create suffering, but what else can you do? People need to know that their beliefs are irrational, and they need to believe that they have this obligation to all of us. And it's something we shouldn't be afraid of. It's something that each and every one of us could rebut at face value. And so I hope everybody will go out and start doing that. Thank you. And now for Yawn Q&A. Awesome, beer and pizza.
We did bring in a very big box, so we expect very big donations.
I was going to make a very big fort out of it. But if you want to use it for donations, then fine.
First off, I don't see, Tony, what time do we have the room till?
Let's say
Eternity?
We should ask the person in charge of the group. Who's that? Oh.
Okay, so we'll just add, we can do questions until someone comes in and kicks us off.
Or until no one has questions, then we can go get shit-faced and do karaoke.
Let me make a correction for you.
That's not a question.
No, I do have a question, but it's based on a correction.
I love corrections.
The correction is that most Christians are not Christians. They're actually following the rules of the Emperor Constantine, who changed all the rules from what Jesus
I'm going to interrupt you real quick.
Sure.
Q&A rules. This is normally my monologue before questions. Not that you're going to do this, but I want to get it out ahead of time, so I'm justified if you do. Questions have a question mark.
Mm-hmm.
It's not your time to lecture the audience. It's question and answer. You ask a question, I answer it. You can monologue at each other at beer and karaoke afterwards. And that, yes, the second one. If you monologue, I'm going to cut you off because it's rude. Okay, go.
Okay, so the the rules that they're actually following are the rules of Constantine after he made his conversion to Christianity. So I bring that argument up a lot. The Orthodox religious reject that almost immediately. How do you, in your mind, in your methodology, take that information and expand it to a Christian methodology of belief?
It depends on the debate I'm doing. If in the debate, if they go into specifics, then I attack their specifics. There's not a reasonable religion on the planet. So whatever the specifics of their religion are, there's going to be some piece of irrationality in there that I can go after. If they're being very, very vague, as most good apologists will do, I love debating ministers. Because ministers really believe God's on their side. They'll go into a debate believing they can't lose, and you're going to hear Pascal's wager and every shitty argument ever. The worst of the worst is what you're going to get from them. And they'll get real specific, and they're fun. The apologists, I don't know if they know their arguments suck, but they're sure good at dancing around ever having to use them. So if they're being vague like that, I try to stay away from the Bible and theology, because the second you make a direct claim, they'll cite the opposite from their holy book and just run you in circles. So I try to focus on the burden of reason being on them and to try and get them to give specifics. And then if they don't, I say, well, this is completely vague, it's useless to anyone you lose, and you shouldn't believe it. We are so close to being karaoke, and you fucked it up.
I'm sorry, I'm a journalist. It's my obligation.
Oh, a journalist. Next question. Go ahead.
No, I was just wondering, in terms, I'm actually a religion reporter and I cover all things. I was at Skepticon this weekend. Missed the proposal, I was not there for that.
There were better talks.
Anyway, I was wondering, I know in some religious traditions, for example, I know in Catholicism you have people who are extremely, like the Jesuit priesthood, for example. They're very highly educated, very reasonable, very logical.
Well, highly educated for sure.
Yes, and well, I would just, in terms of, they tend to operate a lot also on just looking at things in terms of analyzing them very clearly and trying to find very clear, cohesive arguments for things. Have you had these kinds of conversations with anybody from, say, that sort of?
This is what I do for a living.
Right.
So yes, I have.
I wonder what are their typical responses? I'm wondering just.
This stuff
the
in various forms. Yeah, they really don't have better arguments. And I don't say that to disparage them. Well, it is a very disparaging fact, but I don't say that with that intent. It's just the way things are. You say Catholicism, for interest. Up until recently, the Catholic Church's position was that condoms actually help the spread of AIDS rather than slowing it. And this was in contra to every single piece of scientific literature out there. You could hop on Google in 5 minutes and realize what a terrible position that was. And they still held it. In fact, the Pope himself said it was a scientific fact that condoms help spread AIDS in an attempt to spread the Catholic dogma at the expense of what we actually knew. So I think Catholic history is replete with examples like this. So I don't accept that they're logical. I think the primary goal for any religion is to advance their dogma and to gain converts. And they can't do it by being reasonable if you're saying that people are rising from the dead or that a piece of bread becomes the flesh of a 2,000-year-old Canaanite Jew.
Can I follow up on one question?
Sure, you're a journalist. It's your job.
Well, do you ever give this talk to groups of, like a room full of Christians, for example?
Yes, and I prefer doing it.
Okay.
Oh, I do. My favorite place to do debates is in a church. I don't get to do it as often as I'd like, but I do. I gave a talk at Grand Valley State. Grand Valley State earlier this year that was co-sponsored by Campus Crusade for Christ. There were 300 Christians in the audience. Q&A lasted for hours and hours and hours. Were you guys there?
No, but I was in CCC at one point, so.
Okay, right on. Okay, do you guys know what Pascal's wager is?
Yeah.
Okay, everyone. Okay, religious people use this a lot, not because they've read it, but because they thought of it. Because it's a fairly simple idea. And I find that a lot of religious people don't know that it's called Pascal's wager. So anytime someone says Pascal's wager, I'm like, okay, you know what it means. So I was in the Q&A, and there's this young woman in the front row who raised her hand. I call on her, and she says, "What about Pascal's wager?" And I thought, she was an atheist because she knew it by name, and I said, "Are you trolling me?" She's like, "No." Okay, and on to rebutting Pascal's wager. Yeah, I like doing it. The most popular talk I give, from which some of the material from this was drawn, I wrote 2 years ago. It was called Dear Christian. I gave it at Skepticon 3. And I wrote it after going to church for a year. And whenever they sang, and stood and sang, I didn't stand and sing. Whenever they bowed their heads and prayed, I didn't bow my head. So then afterwards, like white blood cells to an infection, they all came up and like, "You're new here, right?" I'm like, "Yeah, I'm JT the Atheist. Why should I believe in God?" And so I spent a year getting these arguments, and these are the arguments you hear from people in the pews. One of the criticisms of atheist writers and such like me is that, oh, we want to engage the 99% of the people who are in the pews and don't know their assholes from a hole in the ground. We won't engage the real big-name apologists. To which there's two rebuttals. If the good arguments are out there, why are 99% of Christians not using them? The other one is that the big-name apologists use these arguments. They're just better at twisting them around and using verbal gymnastics so that they sound more complex than they actually are. But yes, I love speaking in churches. Love it. Love it. Sure.
How do you...
I'm really eager to hear your question, because everyone else during the talk, when I looked at them, they were smiling or nodding, but every time I looked at you, you're just... So I'm a little nervous about your question.
Well, no, I have a come from a liberal Protestant background, and my brother is a liberal Presbyterian pro-gay marriage, but his arguments that we have are just, just so verbose that they just, and you can't read them. They're unreadable.
I've tried.
Yeah, it's and I don't know how to get him to just like, what exactly are you trying to say here? And then his next argument will be even more verbose. This argumentum verbosum. How do you stop someone who's smart, who's got a couple of PhDs, in how do you get them to like actually focus on an argument?
4 ways, and I hope I can remember all of them. First one's easy. Write them back and be like, "Dude, this is long. It doesn't speak any language that resembles English. Come on, talk to me instead of trying to duck me with big words."
No, he's very postmodernist too. So yeah.
Oh,
sorry.
Jesus, one of those.
Yeah.
Okay. The second is to say, look, you know and I know that all the polysyllabic language in this is not accessible to 99% of the planet. I mean, there are places in Africa where they're still killing babies whose bottom teeth come in first because they think they're possessed of the devil, all right? If God wants a relationship with people, he would do it in a way that doesn't require 4 PhDs, all right? This is more what we would expect if people were just trying to win argument verbosum than if there was a God who wanted a relationship with me. If there was a God that wanted a relationship with me, he'd walk into my house, knock on the door and say hi, or do it in some way that's accessible to everybody. So I try to get meta on his argument there. And God, there were 2 other ways I think about going about it, and I totally forgot them already. I guess argument add fuck you is not a good way to go about it, especially if it's your brother.
Well, what I go through, I mean, I'll just take each line, just copy and paste what he said, and then go through each line and try and.
That's another way you can do it.
But it takes for freaking ever. Right?
You could try working it around and making him play by answering your arguments, and saying, look, this is verbose. If God wanted a relationship with me, I wouldn't need to speak 3 languages and have a PhD in philosophy to get through this. But it seems to me that the universe is not designed for life, for instance. We're on a little tiny speck of dust in a radiation-filled vacuum that's lethal to life everywhere. If God made the universe to sustain life, he did a shitty job of it. I mean, if this room were the universe, and you had a speck that was where all life could possibly exist, it would be so microscopic you couldn't find it with our most powerful microscopes. God seems to be kind of silly. It seems like God made the universe for black holes. They thrive in a vacuum. There's more black holes in the universe than grains of sand on the Earth. We look like a byproduct. We look like if there's a flea in an air bubble at the bottom of the ocean looking around at all the fish. Who did Neptune make the sea for, the flea or for the fish? I would try to say something like that and have him start rebutting you instead of the other way around. That would work too, I think. Or you could, that was the fourth one. Or you could just take heart in the fact that no one's ever going to listen to this guy the way he writes.
Well, no, people do listen to him because he has he's a minister and he has, but I think people, they
Nobody
gloss
who
over,
doesn't already buy into it is going to listen
right,
to
but
him.
they gloss over at the impenetrable nature. I mean, they gloss over, oh, this man is so smart, but they can't understand it. And it's,
Right.
It's
Go after those people. When I'm in church, a lot of times the standard operating procedure is, shitty argument number one, rebut shitty argument. Well, you should read this book. And usually it's either something by Lee Strobel or Frank Turek, both of which are dingbats. Not to offend dingbats in any way. And I used to just go and read all the books. And they'll cite their ministry. This guy's so smart, go read his work. He's really the one who's figured it out. And a good way, what I always do then is say, give me the best argument from the book. Take the best argument. If the best argument's good, then I should read all the other ones. Give me the best argument. And 9 times out of 10, they couldn't even give me a single argument out of the book. Because they don't know. They're looking to get away from you. So by keeping the pressure on them like that, you take away any power this guy and his verbose approach has. Go after those. No one who doesn't buy into him is ever going to listen to that dude. They're going to fall halfway asleep. Go after the people who matter and who are willing to talk like human beings. That'd be my advice. Anyone else?
You can go first.
You can go first.
Oh, I will defer to the lady.
Defer to the lady.
sex.
Thank you.
You know, under the code of chivalry, knights were. The code of chivalry only applied to nobles and ladies. Like, knights raped the shit out of peasants all the time under the code of chivalry. Sometimes someone says chivalry is not dead. I'm like, oh shit. Sorry, go ahead.
Well, on that note, in the beginning of your presentation, you talked about like moral obligation to reason and that sort of thing. I'm kind of new to atheism,
Welcome.
so thank you.
The water's warm.
It's nice, I like it. But there's a lot that I'm still trying to like figure out how I feel about. And my parents are both missionaries, actually. My mom like does a bunch of work in Africa and like provides food for people, has like brought people over here to get treated for cancer, and I've seen a lot of good come from it. So like I have a hard time trying to decide if it's like if religion is good for some people and destructive for other people, and if it's like worth reasoning with people who seem to be fine. I don't know. What do you think about that? Like I've seen how religion can be really like detrimental to society and to people, like the examples you gave, and then I've seen other places where it's been really beneficial for others. So
I think at best, what you can say of religion and faith is that it can get people to do good things for bad reasons. Like the example of donating to the United Way every week for fear of the monster under my bed. Bad beliefs can get people to do good things. But the problem is, once you open the door to doing things for bad reasons, people don't only do good things for bad reasons. And by saying that irrationality is okay because it sometimes gets people to do good things, you're necessarily oiling the cogs of the engine that produces all kinds of bad things elsewhere. Faith is kind of a crapshoot that way. We don't need bad reasons to be good. We have good reasons to be good. There are good reasons to go to Africa and help the poor. You don't need God telling you to do it, and you don't need to be lending tacit endorsement to people doing things for any kind of harebrained belief just because the poison doesn't kill everybody when they drink it. Does that make sense?
yeah, that does. Thanks.
No problem. Yeah, the quickest distillation of that would be we don't need bad reasons to be good. Good reasons are available. He deferred to the lady earlier, so I'm going to go with him first.
What did you think of Skepticon 5, and where do you think Skepticon is headed?
Oh boy, you're going to get me on record. This is always tough because I'm the least diplomatic person on the world. I really do believe that life is easier not remembering what lies I've told, so I endeavor never to tell them, and I'm not going to tell them here. Skepticon has gone a little softer since I led it. That bothers me. I'm very, line in the sand, nothing cross. This is Sparta. But you also have to realize that you can't run something forever. And even though that project was my baby, there comes a time when I need to hand it off and let other people run with it and make it theirs. And they've done that, and I've kept my hand out of it. and they've done some things with it that I never would have thought that worked out great. So it's kind of hit or miss. What are some of those things?
I promise I wasn't looking for a
No.
controversial question.
You know what? I hate small talk with the fire of 1,000 burning suns. I'd rather answer hard questions. That's a good question. Something that was important to me when Skepticon began was that everybody who came there would be equal. Skepticon's free to get into. Why? At the time, the only major conferences where people could go and be around their heroes were conferences that cost hundreds of dollars to walk in the door, at minimum. Which was fine, because those organizations took that money and did great things. But it created a class distinction because there was no alternative. Only the people with money had access to the icons of the atheist movement. When Skepticon came out, the email I got almost all the time was, holy shit, something I can finally afford to attend. And just the influx of young people and people who had never gone to a conference before made the energy at Skepticon something that's unlike anywhere else. And I think that continues. Speakers don't hide backstage. They sit in the audience. There's no green room. You literally can't run and hide from everyone. Every speaker who comes there knows they have to interact with the people in the audience, which creates a feeling of equality. Everybody feels like they're part of the same movement, not the audience following the speakers, but we're all in it together. Sure, the speakers have a different job, but they're no better than the person who's running the local chapter. That's beautiful. And I think they brought some speakers, fewer this year, but 4 for sure, who considered themselves above the audience. And I was very upset about that. However, what they've done with marketing and fundraising and putting a lot of bling on the event, I think that's spectacular. I think it makes people feel more at home. I love what they've done with their harassment policy. So there are certain things I think have worked. Where do I think it's going? There's talk about bringing me back on as a consultant for Skepticon 6 because some balls were dropped this year. Emails didn't get answered and stuff like that. Which, how much can you really blame them? They have full-time jobs, they're full-time students, and they're putting in effort to run a free conference for no profit, just for the good of the movement. Aside from all that stuff, sometimes you think you can be Hercules and take on the world when you really need more help. So I see the crew and the volunteer crew getting better, and I see the crew that ran it this year with a year under their belt doing a much better job of that next year. As far as where we go with speakers, I don't know because nothing's been solidified with me yet, and then it's all them. I hope they bring back another young person. Jessica Alquist is a phenomenal human being and getting better all the time. I hope one day she'll branch out and talk about things other than her story because she is an extremely erudite and just genius caliber intellect in a 17-year-old's body. It's just insane. She needs to be talking about other things. But the magic about her is that even though there is this schism in atheism between the diplomats and the firebrands, and I'm a firebrand, we disagree about that all the time, but when people fuck with high schoolers, when religious people do that, we put that aside. Everybody in the movement jumped on behind Jessica because we really care about young people. So I hope they bring back a Harrison Hopkins or Damon Fowler or another young person to give their story because Jessica, obviously deserved a standing O for the talk she gave this year because she was a phenomenal speaker. But I think any young person is going to get a standing O in that environment because we're so grateful about how brave they are. So I hope they bring back someone like that. I know John Corvino wants to come back. I hope they bring him. Honestly, another one of the things we do with Skepticon is we always have 3 slots open for up-and-comers or for speakers people might not know. And this year they brought Jennifer Ouellette, who's kind of well-known, but getting up there, who did a talk on LSD. And I saw that in the program and I was like, what? And then it was amazing. And I saw Deborah Hyde had a talk about werewolves, and I was like, what? And then it was amazing. So they did a good job recruiting for those up-and-comer slots. Something else I'd like to see is, it's really good that it's in the middle of the country. Springfield, Missouri is just smack dab in the middle. So all the poor people who can't afford to go to the conferences can drive there.
Mhm.
Awesome. Still, I'd like to see it eventually get handed off to a student group to run, maybe in collusion with the Skepticon committee, and then move somewhere like St. Louis or Kansas City that's not only in the middle of the country but has a major airport that people can also fly into. I think that would make it more accessible. Something I do like they did this year, though, live stream for everybody who couldn't get there so everyone could watch. So I think they'll keep making changes like that, and I think with experience they'll drop fewer balls, and I really do think, from this vantage point, that Skepticon 6 will be an order of magnitude more impressive than any one before it. I think all the parts are in place. It's kind of a long hike to the end of that question, but yeah.
What can we as old dudes in the community do to help Skepticon 6?
You got money?
Old Skepticon. I've got it already.
Okay,
Been there, done that.
yeah, I understand. Money always helps if you can have it. And when I say money, you don't have to donate $100. This year, I think they have, 1,400 people there? About 1,400? What's 1,400 times 5? 7,000. $7,000 goes a long way. If everybody donated $5, we'd be mint. And of course, people donate more than that. Obviously, to put on Skepticon costs tens of thousands of dollars. Attend. Seriously, attend. When we asked people to give us feedback on all the Skepticons I ran, one of the major things that always came up was networking. It's the easiest place to make friends. Some of you have been to Skepticon. Easiest place in the world to make friends, right? You just walk up to people like, hi, I'm an atheist, and then you go eat lunch with them. It's awesome. So attend. Sorry. Tell them you're busy. Sorry. I'll get back. Oh, yeah, okay. But attend and be there. Without people attending, all the effort the organizers put in would be meaningless. And then, let me dovetail that into what you said. Nobody owns Skepticon. The organizers donate the effort. Everyone else donates the money. Everybody else gets there. The speaker, everyone who speaks there speaks free. If you're Richard Dawkins and you want $20 to speak at Skepticon, you can piss right up a tree. Yeah, because it's not about profiting for anyone. It's about everybody putting into this event. It's owned by the movement, and I don't care who says otherwise. So come, be a part of the movement. Be a part of this big thing that everybody has bought into. I mean, even if you can't do anything else, show up and tell your friends. Carpool, bring 3 people. Part of the reason it was so big this year, if you guys were there at Skepticon 5 this year, a couple times we asked how many new people we've got. Just like every hand went up. I speak across the country, and this year all I heard all year was, yeah, last year we brought 3 people. This year we're bringing 20. Bring people, help people get there. That's something you can do. And talk to religious people. One of the things I love after Skepticon every year, because we're all kind of grateful that it's over because we're all exhausted, but we're sad that it's over because it was so much fun. But then I always get to see the blog posts all across the internet saying, this year I'm going to start a community group, or I'm so inspired. I want to have my story to tell next year. People leave feeling so inspired, so do something. Become part of a community group. Order pizza for Sasha one time during the year so they can have a pizza party and get more people to come. Work within your own community and then bring people down. We don't build our ranks just by changing people's minds. Right now in church, there are a lot of people who don't believe in God, but go to sleep every night afraid they're going to go to hell because they feel like they've got to be in that to make their parents happy or to have a sense of community. And they don't know that they can leave, and we're going to be here to catch them. Even if their parents kick them out of the house or they lose their job, we're going to be here to catch them. So be a part of that and give them that outlet. And the more the atheist movement grows, the bigger Skepticon's going to be because it's owned by everyone. Carla.
2 things. One, if your name is Captain Moore, I got your stuff.
Not it.
Second thing, at Skepticon, I noticed a seriously lower number of the little green stickers with the, I'm not an out atheist, don't take and tag my picture.
Mm-hmm.
So do you think that's indicative of a more general thing? Maybe meaning that atheism is at least by lip service more accepted? Or
Yes.
is that just a statistical thing?
No, I think one of the things the gay rights movement has incredibly right is the coming out idea, the coming out campaign. You could have all the best arguments in the world, but take it from an atheist perspective. You could have all the powerful arguments in the world, but someone who thinks that atheists are pernicious to the extreme might not think their daughter is pernicious to the extreme, or might not think their son is pathological, or their parents. With gay people coming out of the closet, and more, so many Americans are realizing, a lot of them for the first time in their lives, that not only do they know gay people, that they like gay people. And I think atheists are starting to do the same thing, which is telling other people that it's safe. Whenever someone sends me an email that says, if I come out, I could get kicked out of my house, lose my job, should I come out? I want to. What I always write back is, religions don't win by reason. They win by creating social penalties and by fear. It's how they've done it throughout the ages. And the only reason it's so bad for you is because the people in every generation before you weren't brave enough to do it. Do it for them. I'm a firebrand. If more people come out of the closet, it's going to make it that much easier for the next generation. And yeah, it's going to suck for you. It's going to suck for someone eventually. End it here. And I think more people are doing that, which is making it easier for everyone else to come out of the closet. I'm going to yell at the next person just to save my rep. Who wants a piece? I saw the journalist. Journalist? You got a question, journalist?
You kind of answered it already. I was going to ask why you think atheism is growing. You did kind of.
Why do I think atheism is growing?
Yeah, why is it growing? Because I've seen stats about that, and there's been so much talk about this community. And it is the community aspect and the fact that people are more willing to be open about it, and that there are these events like Skepticon. Is the community aspect part of it, do you think? Or what are the other contributing factors?
Absolutely. I think the community aspect's a big part of it. I think the coming out's a big part of it. I think the biggest part is we've been silent for years. And this generation, for the first time, we're speaking up. And that's powerful. Arguments change people's minds. And for the first time, two things there. Up until recently, if you had a religious question, you went to your minister to ask them. Now you can go ask an atheist. Which you can not only ask the atheist in person, you can ask them on the internet. With the rise of the internet, information is available to everyone, and all you got to do is type religious arguments into Google, and you'll have all these atheist pages being like, look, this argument is bullshit, here's why. Now, you don't have to take your preacher's word for it anymore. And so I think the access to that information is helping. Which is, when people email me, telling me that I've changed their mind or I've deconverted them, which, for the record, I've been doing this for 6 years publicly. I'm well over 100. So it does change people's minds. What they always say is, I was so pissed at you. I was so mad at you, and I was going to research, and I was going to prove you wrong, and then you weren't wrong. I'm okay being the bad guy if it makes people hate me enough to open up Wikipedia. As long as people are reading, or as long as people are learning, we're winning. And that's my biggest gripe with a lot of the softer atheists, is they don't put the pressure on them to go do that. They don't put the societal pressure on them to win, to beat us, that forces them to go read and learn. So I think that's a big part of it too, having the access to that. Sir?
You might tell her about the poll of high school students last spring.
Have you heard of the poll of high school students last spring? Actually, here, hang on, let me see if I can. Don't look at my porn. Is this it? Yeah. I give so many
is
talks.
that the among the millennials one? Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You'll notice, like, in every other generation, belief in God stays pretty consistent. This is this generation. So, yeah, obviously, we're growing. Check this out. The bottom line there, the red one, that's the greatest generation. Those are the ones born before 1928. This is people who claim a religious affiliation. The one above them is the silent generation. That's 1928 to 1945. Here's the boomer generation, up to 1964. Right there, that's Generation X, born in 1965. For people born after 1981, 26%. And actually, there's been new data come out, that number's up to 33% now in Generation X. So 33% of people our age don't claim a religious affiliation. Now, there are, of course, greater numbers of atheists, but these are people who are, a lot of them are still fuzzily religious, but less so. But that's okay, it's a gateway drug. I mean, just look at the difference we're making and how it's exponential. I mean, if you were to put this into all you science and statistics people in college, this would not be a linear line of less religion. This would be an exponential uptick, like the beginning one that took a sharp spike down. So yeah, we're growing, and I don't see any reason it's going to stop. I think information is contagious, and I think it's powerful. I think there's just too much out there for religion to win, unless they're willing to change their arguments, but they're not. And I'm here to tell you, I do this for a living. I tour around the country. In fact, we once had down at Missouri State, you guys get Brother Jed, right? Yeah. We get religious preachers too, and you guys know that people crowd around them and everybody's yelling, everybody wants to get their 2 cents in, and most people don't have shit worthwhile to say. How could God make a rock so big he couldn't lift it? Yeah. And everyone's just mad and yelling. So we were really good at conceiving of ways to get above the noise. And one of the things we did is we had 4 stacks of poster board. And with numbers on the back, 111, 222, 333, and we had a master key sitting off to the side, and those numbers corresponded to different arguments. So if you use the cosmological argument, like, okay, it's 14, all 4 of us would hold up that, and it would have the refutation to that argument on it, and just stand beside it. And then he'd move the goalpost to the design argument, and be like, that's 11, okay. But they're that predictable. I mean, these arguments have been beaten down, and all it takes is 2 minutes on Google to realize how much they suck. I could have given you in my talk today footnotes upon foot. How do we know a global flood didn't happen? I could cite you, study after study, article after article about how it's just mathematically impossible. But why? It's just wrong on its face. You don't need to know all this shit. Their arguments are that fucking bad. So I think religion's inability to adapt is killing them too, but it's only able to do that because we're speaking up. And you can just examine this for yourself. If you could bring someone from the 14th century back to life and interview him, like, his knowledge about history and math and science would be embarrassing. It would be dwarfed by a modern-day 5-year-old. But his knowledge of Christianity, perfect. Religion just doesn't change. It doesn't adapt, and I think it's going to die as humanity does. Yeah?
To what extent do some of these atheist movements affect other countries?
We're actually lagging behind the civilized world. Most civilized countries are far more atheistic than we are. We're really the anomaly. In fact, if you were to plot them on a line graph of religiosity, we're way the fuck out here. It's weird. So atheism's picking up in the rest of the civilized world pretty severely. If you go to the United Kingdom and you're a Christian, you're in the minority. Most of them are atheists. Speaking of religion's ability to not adapt, everybody knows what religion the Tea Party is, right? God, country, God and guns, right? Every single sane person knows that the Republicans got hammered pretty good in this last election.